Imagine this. You wake up, grab your phone, and start scrolling through the endless streams of information bombardment. News, tweets, stories, videos. It's a deluge of data coming at you from every direction, but how much of it is actually true? What if I told you that a large portion of what you consume online and through traditional media is potentially fake? Lies, twisted facts, and made-up narratives designed to provoke outrage, make you keep reading, or push an agenda. Sounds crazy, right? Well, brace yourself, because things are about to get wild. In our hyper-connected world, controversies erupt like wildfire over almost every topic imaginable. One day it's a celebrity feud, the next it's a political scandal, or the latest viral challenge causing chaos. Keeping up is tough enough, but formulating genuine opinions? That's an entirely different beast when facts are so malleable and open to distortion. Let's put this into perspective. Do you remember Pizzagate? Yeah, that's the one. The insane conspiracy theory that alleged a pedophile ring was being run out of a Washington, D.C. pizza place? It started as unsubstantiated ramblings on fringe websites and online forums, but quickly gained mainstream traction. The consequences were devastating. A deranged man fired shots into the restaurant, thankfully with no injuries. But all of this stemming from fiction masquerading as reality. Now that we are in the election year, what's going to be the next Pizzagate? And this is just the tip of the misinformation iceberg. According to a Massachusetts Institute of Technology study, out of 126,000 stories retweeted by 3 million people on Twitter from 2006 to 2017, 70% of false information reached more people than the truth. Much of the false information was not an honest mistake, but instead an intentionally fabricated lie designed to provoke and manipulate the public for engagement. Whether it's political propaganda, advertising, marketing BS, or just good old-fashioned gossip, our information consumption has become utterly warped. Distinguishing fact from fiction is a real-life psychological battle we face daily. We are all constantly questioning the motives behind the messages we ingest. So, how do we sort the truth from the lies? How do we distinguish trusted sources from those peddling agendas, conspiracy theories, and flat-out fakes? Buckle up, because we're going on a thrill ride through the dark underbelly of misinformation and propaganda. Let's start by getting on the same page about some key terms here. We're going to be throwing around words like misinformation and disinformation a lot, so it's important that we understand the distinction between the two. Misinformation is when false or inaccurate information spreads, but there's no intent to mislead or cause harm behind it. Maybe it started as an honest mistake that got shared before being corrected. For example, a recent social media video shared by thousands of people claimed that the US gave Ukraine $91.3 billion in aid, which was more than twice the amount spent on the war in Afghanistan.
Here's a 9-month recap of all the money laundering that we've given to Ukraine. In March, 13.6 billion, in May, 40 billion, and now November, 37.7 billion. That's almost 33% more than Russia spent on their military for this war. That's also double the US expenditure for its own war in Afghanistan. But don't worry, we hired 87,000 new IRS agents to make sure that $600 you got on Venmo gets its piece of the pie sent to Ukraine, so we're all good, all right.
However, the facts are different. The US has actually spent over $849 billion on the war in Afghanistan since 2001, including reconstruction efforts. Disinformation, on the other hand, is when false information is fabricated and spread strategically to deceive people. The end goal is to manipulate their views, push an agenda, or somehow mislead them for someone else's gain. It's crafted BS, basically. Take this video claim, for instance, that stated that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were never nuked. The misleading content directly contradicts the well-documented historical facts that the United States dropped an atomic bomb in Hiroshima, killing an estimated 237,000 people, and 3 days later, a second bomb on Nagasaki, resulting in over 73,000 deaths. And this deceptive spin machine of misinformation and disinformation, it's been hard at work sharing public opinions throughout history, which is where the concept of propaganda comes into play. Propaganda is just information, true or not, that's spread to promote a particular political cause or agenda. Now, propaganda isn't necessarily a bad thing on its own. We see it used positively in public health campaigns, military recruitment efforts, or even companies trying to PR spin their latest product launch. The key is whether it's based on facts or based on fiction, because, make no mistake, when propaganda is rooted in disinformation and deception, it can have devastating real-world impacts. A perfect example is during the Cold War era, when the US and Soviet Union were locked in an intense propaganda battle to undermine each other on the global stage. On the American side, we saw psychological operations, PSYOPs, planting KGB defectors to spread alarming rumors about Soviet military aggression. Meanwhile, Soviet disinformation artists created an entirely subfield known as Operation Denver or Operation Infection, dedicated to discrediting US policies by any means necessary, including fabricating stories about AIDS being a CIA bioweapon. The effects of these mutual disinformation strikes were chilling. Thousands of non-credible stories and questionable documents were pumped into mainstream circulation, convincing swathes of people worldwide to distrust entire governments and sow general chaos. And if that Cold War propaganda seems like ancient history, let's fast forward to the early 2000s, when the White House communication team was hard at work manufacturing public support for the hugely controversial Iraq War through deliberate misinformation. We're talking about the claims about Saddam Hussein's regime harboring weapons of mass destruction and having ties to Al-Qaeda, which were widely decried as misleading or false information by reputable global intelligence agencies at the time. Yet those narratives were hammered into the public consciousness for months via official press conferences and TV appearances by administration officials. The result? Over 70% of Americans showed support for invading Iraq in early 2003, according to Gallup polls. Whether you agree with that conflict or not, there's no denying intensive government propaganda playing a pivotal role in manufacturing public consent. In fact, the Pentagon even employed private PR firms and retired military commanders to pose as independent experts and advocate for the war on TV and radio without disclosing their ties to the administration, a trap millions of Americans fell into. Hook, line, and sinker. Now, I'm not saying that the US and its allies have cornered the market on dirty propaganda by any means. Whether it was Soviet disinformation tactics, Saddam Hussein's own myth-making about Iraq's military capabilities pre-invasion, or any number of other state-sponsored misinformation ops throughout history, all parties have been guilty of it to some degree. The point is, using disinformation and deceptive narratives to shape public opinion has been a widespread tactic by governments, militaries, radical groups, corporations, you name it, for decades, if not centuries. And in our modern digital age, it's more turbocharged than ever before. This brings us to the present day reality, where misinformation and propaganda have been injected with rocket fuel thanks to the proliferation of the internet, social media, deep fakes, botnets, and more. The game has changed, and what you know is about to get really, really doubtful. Everything we just covered in the history of misinformation and propaganda has been turned upside down in recent years. Why? 2 words: digital age. This modern era of interconnected tech and online platforms has the ability to create and spread disinformation at ludicrous levels. Forget pamphleteers handing out stacks of printed lies on street corners. Today's deceivers can spark a global firestorm of falsehoods with a few keystrokes on their keyboards. We're talking about influence campaigns designed to stir tensions, amplify hate, and make us turn against each other as a society. Let's use the 2016 US presidential election, when Russian troll farmers published multiple posts to reach millions of American users, sowing social and political divides as a prominent example. That's not even counting the tens of thousands of social bots they deployed to retweet and artificially inflate the spread of divisive disinformation, while a network of shady websites posing as mainstream news furthered the chaos. The end result? Widespread public distrust and tribalism that's still raging years later. And sadly, such digital propaganda strikes against Western democracies have only intensified since then. Whether it's mysterious groups of hackers leaking hacked emails from political parties, or state-backed groups using deepfake AI to spawn deceptive videos, no low blow is off limits. Take the Israel-Palestine war as a prime example. Researchers uncovered a coordinated campaign of millions of malicious tweets, some featuring AI-generated deepfakes with fake blood, fake babies, and even fake realities informed by movies, all spread anonymously in an attempt to sway public support. Or how about the deluge of manipulated video and audio from the Ukraine invasion that has flooded the internet? One viral clip appeared to show Ukrainian soldiers attacking Russian tanks, except it was blatantly taken from the video game Arma 3, yet Twitter had to apply warnings after it racked up hundreds of views. This phenomenon of AI-generated synthetic media being weaponized with such ease is a terrifying addition. We're already seeing deepfakes deployed regularly to add fake imagery to new videos, put words in politicians' mouths, and stroke tensions around global events. But visual deception is just the start. There's also compromat, the weaponization of hacked or forged emails, documents, and personal files to spark scandals, disrupt proceedings, or degrade public trust. Just like when hackers linked to Russian intelligence dumped a massive trove of emails from French President Macron's campaign in 2017 ahead of the election. These hack and leap ops have practically become standard procedures for groups looking to destabilize their adversaries. Just look at how 70% of Iran's gas stations were shut down by the hacker group Gonjesh Durandi. Aside from gas stations, the same group infiltrated the country's rail networks and steel factories. Of course, nation-states aren't the only players dipping their toes into these shady digital disruption playbooks. Private corporations are getting in on the act too. For instance, pharmaceutical companies employed an army of social media influencers to market drugs, influence public opinions, sway public discourse, and potentially silence critics. Big pharmas like GlaxoSmithKline, Bayer, Pfizer, and AstraZeneca are regular culprits. But wait, it gets worse. There's also growing evidence of underground troll farms being hired out to manipulate public opinion on controversial issues like climate change, health policies, labor laws, and more. Thousands of faceless accounts pumping out toxic lies for the highest bidder's agenda. The scariest part? Experts estimate only a fraction of these orchestrated disinformation campaigns are ever exposed or taken down by platforms. This means the rest continue to permeate our news feeds, chats, and comments, a constant drip of deception we're all unwittingly swimming through. And that's just the current reality. As tools like AI language models and deepfake video generators become even more advanced and accessible, we're likely to see a nightmarish explosion of synthetic media that can make confirming reality versus fiction nearly impossible. But don't lose hope just as yet. While the flow of lies and deception we're swimming against is strong, you have more power than you think to fight back against it. Firstly, one of the best defenses is being a critical news consumer diversifying their media diet. Don't just rely on a couple of major sources. Mix it up. Subscribe to independent outlets, follow reputable local journalists, and check in with non-profits doing independent reporting. The more varied your information streams, the easier it becomes to analyze a story from multiple angles and identify potential biases, agendas, or missing context. It's Media Literacy 101. Also, fact-checking is pretty important these days. When you encounter a wild claim or sketchy-looking graphic making the social media rounds, take a few seconds to verify it yourself before hitting share. It's also crucial to be aware of your own cognitive biases and psychological vulnerabilities that make you susceptible to falling for disinformation in the first place. We all naturally tend to accept information that conforms to our pre-existing beliefs as gospel truth. Ask yourself, what evidence is being presented here? Are there primary sources cited? Does this align with other credible reporting I've seen, or is it an outlier? What might the creator's potential ulterior motives be? Think like a fact-checking detective following every possible lead. Look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Separating fact from fiction in today's media hellscape is a never-ending battle for our eyeballs and brainwaves. But I think it's a fight worth waging if we want to preserve a semblance of shared objective reality. That's why I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be proactive about verifying every piece of information before accepting or spreading it. Don't be a link in the disinformation chain, my friends. And if you're digging this crash course on media literacy and want to keep leveling up your truth detection skills, then you don't want to miss out on our exclusive content. Smash the subscribe button so you'll be along the first to know as we continue pulling back the curtain on these hard truths traditional media will never want you to know. Until then, stay safe and goodbye for now.